A warm welcome to all our viewers to our series Natural Medicine Today. Today we are devoting ourselves to the topic of diabetes, and is that the end of the sweet life? We are discussing this with the chief physician of the Biomed Sonnenberg Clinic. And I am very happy that she is here today, Alexandra Kotthaus. And we're going to go into the topic of diabetes holistically, and the different positive properties of a particularly valuable diet, which in turn can influence the blood sugar level and all other parameters positively. Stay tuned. Hello, dear Alexandra. Thank you for coming. With you, I always have to make sure that we don't exceed the time, because it's always so exciting, and of course today too. Diabetes is a bit my area of expertise. I wrote my thesis about it in the studio at the time. And at that time the direction was advice towards the Mediterranean diet and not the German Society for Nutrition. That was really a red flag for us at the time, where we said, okay, if you bring a diabetic properly to the edge with their health, then you recommend the German diet to them. How do you see it today? How do you see the diabetic when they come to your clinic today? We're talking about type 2, right?
Yes, I'm glad if I see one. And yes, I also told him that from our point of view it is actually one of the clinical pictures that is relatively easy to treat. And in conventional medicine, it is often a chronic disease, which may even be threatened. If you don't take the medication, eventually you'll get leg ulcers and nervous disorders and so on. And for the vast majority of people, this could be prevented relatively easily. And it's very easy to treat. And almost more people come to us. Some of them, of course, who say from the start, I want everything I have to be treated for naturopathically, or alternatively biologically. And the people who have been walking this path for a long time, who are with us and are already of advanced or older age, we don't have that at all. So I can say that very clearly. Patients who walk this path usually do not get diabetes, and it is extremely rare that the typical civilization diseases ever occur there. Not 100% excluded. There are just other factors, influences, or not every patient who is coming to us now has had a very strict diet for the last few years, but just a much more conscious, or maybe much fresher, or fruit and vegetable heavy diet, or with more natural foods, albeit sometimes omnivorous than the average person. And average people simply have the problem, of course also in young families, when the mother works, somehow you have to find a way to get everything balanced. It is of course also difficult, so that one can say roughly that older people who from the outset simply grew up with a different diet, with a different quality of food, maybe sometimes didn't have to eat so strictly, but it was enough to go that route more or less. I'll say the more natural, the alternative route, without getting these diseases. So of course something has changed from generation to generation, so that actually speaks for our good work, including patients who have been around for a long time, who just have something here, have something there and come, that we see that they don't develop many diseases. I was almost happy about that. Nice to have a type 2 diabetic here, we'll manage that somehow.
What about the standard values? We've had it before, from the USA, extremely low standard values spill over, and in the case of diabetics, the blood sugar on an empty stomach is checked and the HbA1c, and what is the current status there?
We still have completely human normal ranges here. But the trend is from America, that the limits for this blood sugar value are also lowered, just like for the blood pressure, or the cholesterol level. And as a result, the indications for prescribing medication are increasing. I actually think that there is something to these values if you measure the values on healthy people, and they are longer healthy and then dying less, then I think that's true. Only the conclusion that they die less quickly, or less ill if I lower the blood pressure with blood pressure medication, when I have high blood pressure, or lower the high cholesterol level with cholesterol sinkers, or treat the diabetes with diabetes medication, that is no longer true. But I definitely see patients who detoxify that all by themselves. They just have lower cholesterol levels at some point, LDL cholesterol levels. I always measure the homocysteine. Cholesterol and LDL levels are often taken for vascular risk factors, or LDL is referred to as the bad cholesterol. The triglycerides are the actual blood fats, and homocysteine also play an important role, as does lipoprotein A, which is rarely measured, which in my opinion does not necessarily have to be done for every person. And another thing, a HOMA index. Someone who's on the brink now, I'll also do a HOMA index. So the ratio of blood sugar to insulin release, to determine an early stage.
I can recognize a kind of hyperinsulinemia there.
For example.
Okay. And which factors are really relevant for you? To maybe get the insulin receptors going again. They said they were a bit dulled by all the sugar. Or what really happens to the insulin receptors?
The insulin receptors, it's more like they say too much sugar, it exhausts the pancreas. So once the insulin is produced in specific cells of the pancreas and then docks to the insulin receptor, and then the glucose can be absorbed into the tissue. Now we have several disturbances. In type 1 diabetics, insulin is usually affected. I once had a patient who also had antibodies against insulin. There are antibodies against islet cells. These are the cells that produce it, so that the pancreas itself is affected. And then there's the problem with the insulin receptor, which is more like peripheral insulin resistance. That's more like what I have with type 2 diabetics. And of course a lot of sugar is not good, or white sugar, industrial sugar, those refined, highly processed types of sugar that exist, plus the amount that many people eat, or other refined carbohydrates that rarely come alone. This to go has become established. You drive to work, oh there's the baker who's still on the way, then I'll take a sandwich with me, it has a lettuce leaf on it, or a croissant. And of course the croissant has fat, and the sandwich too. And then depending on the topping, I have something else. And then sometimes it's not the roll itself that's the problem, but the combination. Because the fat together with the sugar, that's what makes the insulin resistance. When I eat certain fats like pork, it stays in the body for an incredibly long time. So there is such a trial. It was actually only a small experiment. For television, so to speak, for a film. Then they gave 3 athletes burritos, it was America, with a typical composition. There were 2 attempts. Once they took blood from them, let the blood stand, and then the layer of fat settled on top after the meal. And then they ate the burrito vegan and with reduced fat. And then you saw that it was seriously less. But ultimately, if I now eat a piece of pork, this fat can be there in the blood for 12 hours or more. And during this time, I just have increased insulin resistance. So the combination is just this, which is problematic. And I said it before in another program, if you imagine a diagram like this, a curve, I have the pure glucose, it makes the blood sugar rise, and then it falls and goes down. As soon as I mix that with fat, not only do I get more of the glucose, I also have higher blood sugar levels. So I make a higher peak out of it. I combine these two things together. If I combine it with vegetables, I have a flattening of the curve. So it's not the carbohydrates themselves, it's the interaction. And in diabetes, the amount of fat, the quality of fat, and the combination with fats also play a very important role.
What about you? We have some diabetes diets. There is also the Mediterranean version, low carb, ketogenic, things like that. For the current situation with the study situation, what really is a form of nutrition where you say, okay, with that the diabetic of today is on the right scientific track?
If we start with the preliminary stage, then it has been shown that it is a diabetes prophylaxis, if the main calorie content is from 49 to 56%. Good carbohydrates. I'm not saying it's made up of carbohydrates. And good carbohydrates are of course fruit and vegetables, and not pasta, or refined baked goods, or the mix. I don't have the sugar in the pizza. I have everything in the cake that potentiates each other. So fruit protects against diabetes, and even if you eat a lot of fruit, but there is hardly anyone who eats too much fruit. I'll say that too, but I noticed myself that it was so deep in me that I didn't dare at first to tell diabetic patients, eat some fruit. Until I figured it out. There are diabetic patients who are advised this way by the nutritionist in the hospital. Fruit has fructose and that's not good. When I was a child, there was a lot of advertising, diabetics should eat a lot of fructose, because it does not increase the blood sugar. You have to let it melt in your mouth again. And that wasn't all wrong, but the fruit is good and the fructose is poison, and that's not the same. But that was so deeply rooted in me that I thought, no, don't eat sugar. Then some still say, oh no, when I eat fruit, my blood sugar level shoots up. So now I know a lot more about it and I can say, yes, but with the fruit, early in the morning, it even depends on what you ate the night before. It really may depend on what you ate the night before as to whether that piece of fruit at breakfast is causing your blood sugar to spike. I am now so fit, experienced and confident in what I do that I tell a diabetic at the beginning, reduce that now, ramp that up a bit. And then I usually see relatively quickly, that was now a type 1 girl, but with an insanely high insulin dose, with 32 units of basal insulin. I found it really a lot for a child. It seems to say something to you. And after a few weeks, we were able to reduce that to 16 units. I think that's really good. Too much insulin also causes the fat to be retained in the fat cells and other things. As a result, I can now say my diabetes patients can eat fruit again. But are of course also trained around it, in which combinations and so on. Or at the beginning maybe only with green stuff or something, because it is buffered again.
There was a phase where you have now gone into low-carb history with diabetics. This increased morning blood sugar due to this gluconeogenesis, because no more carbohydrates were available, the body mobilized the sugar itself again. How do you see this process? Is it good in itself now? Does it also happen when they eat a lot of fruit and vegetables that through the night they mobilize the body's own glucose again? Or what is the body doing there? What do you say about this phenomenon in general?
Gluconeogenesis is what the liver does, and when it's required, this is important for survival. When we don't get a meal, the liver starts to drive gluconeogenesis. By the way, if we really ate keto with really zero sugar, which is not possible, because someone who eats ketogenic still eats things that contain some carbohydrates, because every piece of vegetable contains carbohydrates, fats and proteins, then we could not survive long. I got that from my son now, who studies biochemistry in Zurich, because the body then lacks an essential substance, which it can't make without sugar, and then sooner or later we would die. And gluconeogenesis itself, it's super good that we have it. But it's also like this, it's like extra work by the liver, extra work. And depending how bad my liver is, I steal the capacity for something else. So I'm really for a 12-hour fast break, which most people easily can deal with. But it can also be the case that there are certain patients with certain metabolic problems, or detoxification on certain things, or certain vitamin deficiencies. For example, they are not able to promote gluconeogenesis well. They really have to eat in short intervals, sometimes at 11 o'clock before bed, something containing carbohydrates, otherwise they won't even be able to sleep through the night. So it is individual. And the other thing is also, sweet is such an archaic need in us. I used to think, many years ago, this is all trained and this is the wrong intestinal flora, if you want something sweet. And that's the way it is. And then in a book it said, yes, in the past, people didn't need a limit for sweet. We have a limit, now we might actually be fed up with fats or proteins. So we've had enough of that now, but there's no limit to sweet at all. And of course it wasn't necessary before, because there was no bad food in that sense. But also indigenous peoples are totally keen, when they have honey, when they find a bee nest and get honey. And now I think sweet isn't just a psychological effect, or something totally unhealthy. We're warped that way, but that's really an archaic need of the body. In the meantime, I had the opportunity to work with a metabolism device, which simply measured that some people only burn carbohydrates. So I put them under massive stress when I switched to a low-carb diet. But we also reduce our stress level with the carbohydrates. And there one can say, it is even. Just listen to the end now. It doesn't even matter if I take sugar, whether I take white sugar, it also reduces the stress level. In hospitals, there are usually bowls of sweets in the nurse's room and in the doctor's room. And then they just dig in there. There are hardly any people who eat worse than hospital staff. And there is this health study, because it should actually be done on people who eat particularly well. And actually, they eat particularly badly. And now I've lost the thread.
Why sugar calms down stress, and listen to the end.
Exactly, the sugar brings down the adrenaline level. But of course, I have a rebound phenomenon, an excessive release of insulin, if I now take the white sugar. If I take the fructose, not fructose, for God's sake, Alex, don't say fructose, take fruit, then the glucose in the intestine diffuses into the blood via a diffusion gradient. And the fruit is of course mostly water. And many only see that it consists of fructose, which is also glucose. So I have a slower rise in blood sugar, a less high insulin release. And of course, if I eat a piece of fruit, I have polyphenols and vitamin C and probably 3,000 health-preserving substances in there. And now some hospital dietitians are saying don't eat fruit because of the fructose. What do patients do then? Then they eat a muesli bar and a roll in between.
They also get really great ready-made yogurt and canned fruit in the hospital. But what about dried fruit? Is there anything you can recommend? Can I use that as a source?
Now we're getting to a point where I'm slowly starting to differentiate between diabetics and non-diabetics and tumor patients. So I say to my tumor patients, I'm not for low carb, but it's not like I'm saying now eat a kilo of dates at a time. Even then, please keep looking at the combination. What did I eat before the meal? Possibly. But even a diabetic does not die if they eat a date. So if they say now I have the choice between a whole grain biscuit and a date, then I would definitely say the date. And even with my overestrogenized women with their blood sugar crises, I just learned at some point if I give the fruit and lots of dates, just put some dates in your purse. Then they do it consistently, when they have this feeling of hunger. I want carbohydrates now, and they satisfy it with high-quality carbohydrates. And sometimes it is important that you really only take high-quality carbohydrates. They all get out of the vicious circle, and they all get out of permanent hunger, and they get away with fewer meals during the day, and are usually happier too. And there we have another phenomenon. I used to work as a student in a retirement home. There are relatively many type 2 diabetics, and of course, many who have dementia. And also the demented type 2 diabetics. They really stole each other's desserts. And then I thought, my God. But I cannot let a diabetic live in this deficiency. They shouldn't. They go crazy at some point. Just like many people who are ketogenic who say, I'm invited to a birthday party, then I eat a piece of cake. So then I'm not eating the carbohydrates right now, that are still good and that also provide me with vitamins and antioxidants, but then I really dig in. But I can help prevent that. And as I said, fruit, a diabetic is allowed to eat fruit. And sometimes only the fruit is considered and not what I eat together throughout the day. And a piece of fruit is better than if I eat pasta now, which is usually not withheld from any diabetic. There is also delicious pasta, which my diabetics are allowed to eat, but not the gluten-containing ones.
So finally, what would you recommend to a type 2 diabetic, distributed throughout the day and also maybe going into pauses, non-pauses? I find that quite interesting. Meal breaks, how often?
That depends. If I eat a little lighter, if I eat a lot of fruit and vegetables, then it can be that I can't get by with 3 meals a day. You have to find a way. It depends. If someone is already insulin dependent, then it's all right. They have a regular rhythm. Then you can easily adjust the insulin with it. And that I get the lowest possible dose of it. Someone who is not insulin dependent, then maybe it's a little less important, but having a rhythm with your food during the day is basically good. But then they should go a bit according to their hunger pangs. So I'm not saying just 3 meals or even just 2 a day. I don't do that anyway, but it may also be that they have 5 meals a day, because then sometimes a fruit and vegetable meal does not last that long. And because right now I'm a diabetic in the early stages, which is where my style always would be, get rid of diabetes completely, I tell them. It's all right if you eat the fats, which cause the insulin resistance, separately from the carbohydrates. And you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Some people have to change their metabolism so much that people say it's not always that easy, that people say it's better to take a bit of fat with it, to simply achieve a feeling of satiety. Or saying that if you want to eat a piece of meat, you have to have steamed vegetables and a salad with it. Or next time you use potatoes instead of meat so that it works. But there we also come into a bit of an individual area, how well it works, at what stage is it. But that means that I may sometimes make transitional recommendations. But usually it goes quite well. Then when I say, at a certain point, increase the dose of fruit. This often works well in terms of blood sugar levels, but also in terms of well-being. Fruit releases serotonin. Fructose, on the other hand, pure, can lead to depression.
There is a lot more complexity hidden in the vegetables and fruit, which I don't think we really know at the end of the day. Thank you very much, dear Alexandra.
Is the time up again?
Yes, with you it just goes much too fast. But I hope you come again. And of course I'm always happy when we know so much and get this all-round view. That's super nice, also with the diet. And yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, I hope you were able as a diabetic at home to take one or the other impulse and trick with you. And thank you for watching. Have a wonderful time and see you soon. Bye.